Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 3 of our 5-part Informed Family Fall Webinar Series. I am Judy Zabel, Health Educator at the La Crosse County Health Department and member of LCPN, La Crosse County Prevention Network. I'll be your host today. LCPN's mission is to mobilize La Crosse County to build healthy youth, young adults, and families through education, collaboration, and advocacy to prevent alcohol, tobacco, and drug misuse. I want to remind you that there are 2 other webinars in the fall series. Please share with family, friends, and colleagues, and you can register at lacrossecpn.org. Our coalition membership organizes around 12 sectors. We'd like to conduct a poll at this time to learn what sectors you are representing here today. Please complete the poll at this time. So thank you. It looks like we have a wide variety in our audience from state and local, families and parents, healthcare professionals, and schools. Glad to have you aboard. I just have a few logistics that I would like to go through to share and to get us started. Then I'll introduce Lisa in just a moment. First of all, our Informed Family webinars will be recorded and can be located at La Crosse County Prevention Network on Facebook and YouTube. We are streaming on Facebook Live right now, so anybody who was not able to join in Zoom due to capacity can jump over to our La Crosse County Prevention Network Facebook Live page and join that live stream, and you will see the exact same content. Handouts for today's presentation were emailed to the email provided on your Zoom registration. The email comes from Judy Zabel. For Facebook participants, please email me at jzabel@lacrossecounty.org, and I'll share them with you after the end of this presentation. If you have questions for our presenter and are watching on Zoom, please put them in the box marked Q&A. That way our team can keep track of all the questions and they can be answered at the end of our presentation. We will also have a team standing by on our La Crosse County Prevention Facebook page. Any questions you may have can be placed in the Facebook comments section, and our team will be sure to get those questions to us. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Lisa McCormick. Lisa speaks on the topic of sex trafficking, drug addiction, bullying, acceptance, and her faith throughout her personal journey as a parent of a sex trafficking victim. She educates groups to encourage them to know, for the signs of at-risk youth, to not be afraid to talk to them and show them that you care, and to give them someone to trust. Jeffrey McCormick, Lisa's son, was a 17-year-old boy from rural Wisconsin, recruited into a sex trafficking ring out of Madison and exploited until his death in September of 2016. Lisa has made it her life's purpose to share her family's story so others understand trafficking and how easily our vulnerable children can get caught up in it. Lisa walks alongside parents, grandparents, caregivers, and all others, giving hope that they are not alone in this journey. Lisa is a member of the Wisconsin Anti-Human Trafficking Advisory Council and is featured in the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families documentary film on youth sex trafficking in Wisconsin, released in 2019. She is a frequent speaker throughout Wisconsin for educational and professional organizations, as well as at schools, churches, and public awareness events. Lisa, I welcome you. We can switch screens.
So thank you for having me here today and being able to speak with your group. I'm here today to talk about human trafficking. And probably several of you may have attended some seminar or gone to a class or something, or at least heard in the news about what's going on in our world today with human trafficking. But I want to talk to you today about the perspective of a parent's point of view and what it was like navigating the system alone, having nobody to rely on or support me as I went through that. And as I went through that entire process, I learned that I never want another family to have to endure that alone, or for someone to even recognize how close to home this really is. I live over in Toma, so I'm very close to you in La Crosse. A lot of my story, excuse me, relates to different locations in La Crosse. So this is us. This is hometown. This is our back door. It's happening here, and I'm hoping you'll get to understand a little more about what human trafficking is. My youngest son, Jeffrey. We're going to make sure slides. Here we go. My youngest son, Jeffrey, was a victim of sex trafficking prior to his death. And before this had happened to our family, I really had no idea what human trafficking was, or that it even happened anywhere around here. 4 years ago, just this past September 30th, my passed away from a drug overdose and was trafficked for about 4 months prior to his death. Now, I'm going to get into his story and tell you more about that, but I really would like to start out with telling you what human trafficking really is. Human trafficking is happening in all 72 counties in the state of Wisconsin, as well as in all Native American tribes. It's happening everywhere. We really need to know what it looks like and what to do if you even see it. I'd like to start with a federal definition of human trafficking. Human trafficking is the act of recruiting, harboring, transporting, providing, or obtaining a person for compelled labor or commercial sex acts with the use of force, fraud, or coercion. What makes trafficking so unique is the words force, fraud, and coercion. The use of force is the beating of someone or withholding something from someone to get them to do what you want them to do. The fraud is the telling of lies or making promises to them to believe what they want you to believe. And then the coercion, the psychological brainwashing. Now, most commonly, you've heard of labor trafficking. You know, that's the working for free or extremely low wages. And then sex trafficking, and that's what I'm going to focus on today. Sex trafficking is the providing of sexual acts for a value. Now, providing sexual acts for a value does not necessarily just mean money. This could mean in exchange for drugs, a place to live, food, pay your living expenses such as your rent or utilities, pay your phone bill. In some neighborhoods, it might be for safety and protection. And then in some places, it can be as simple as a new hairdo, getting your nails done, a new purse or clothing, a new gaming system. Now, the federal law, as well as Wisconsin state law, says that anyone under the age of 18 cannot consent to sex for money, coercion, or value because they do not have the means. So if we have any suspicion of human trafficking at all and a child is having sex, it is considered child abuse. So there's some different terms of trafficking that I want to go over with you. Many times trafficking victims do not realize that they're being trafficked or even see themselves as a trafficking victim. What might look to you from the outside as their personal choice is most often not. In almost all cases, it is survival. Now, trafficking most commonly is seen as a Romeo situation. This is where a boy and a girl have a normal relationship. Boy likes girl, girl likes boy, they start dating. They might even, you might even invite them over to your home and get to know the family, and you like this person. It could go on for years, before they decide to start trafficking. And then suddenly one day he's going to say, hey, will you do this favor for me? My buddy's coming over, will you do this? And so that suddenly that relationship starts to change. There's a lot more psychological manipulation that's happening. He may shower her with gifts and promises, but there's always going to be that threat that if you don't do what I want, I'm going to take care of you in another way. Normally violence, but not always. But always is that feeling of you owe me something because I'm giving you these things. Interfamilial trafficking is, we see this in a lot of our larger cities where grandma was trafficked, now mom gets trafficked, she has a child, and her child gets trafficked. Until they break that cycle, they'll start seeing a lot of the trafficking happening within the families. A guerrilla trafficker is the violent one. This is the person who is going to make them do things through violence. So I want you to have sex with these people. If you don't do it, or you don't do what they want you to do, I'm going to beat you up for that. This is very similar to the situation my son was in a guerrilla situation. He was constantly being threatened and beaten up when he didn't do what was asked of him. The last type is more of a parental figure. I have on here a daddy or a mama. They will use that term and speak of this person that they're with as their daddy or as their mama. This parental figure is a person who jumps in and says, I'm going to take care of you. I'll give you a place to live. I'll do your laundry. I'll get you some clothes. I'll feed you. I'll take care of all your personal needs if you'll do these things for me. Sometimes it's situations where parents might be drug addicts and the kids are home alone, and they don't want CPS to come in and get involved, or they don't want someone to find out that they're living there alone most of the time. So the older sibling will get into trafficking to protect the younger sibling so that they don't get separated. So we'll see those type of things happening. The term sugar daddy or sugar mama is one term you may be familiar with, and that's someone who showers you with gifts and all these things and then expects you to do something for them or owe them something in return. We're seeing a lot more of that type of thing happening. Some victims actually enjoy that lifestyle, and so it's even harder to get them out of that because they enjoy all the benefits far outweigh the negatives that happen in the position. So there's some other things that I want you to be familiar with, some other facts on trafficking to understand, especially as I get into my story. So the hierarchy of trafficking is the person in charge. The top person is called a pimp. You may be familiar with this term. In the 70s, it was the guy in the velvet jackets and hats and the big old chains and everything. And that's not what a pimp looks like today. If you talk to most victims, they're probably going to tell you that they were attractive, good-looking men or women that they enjoyed being with and spent time with. So they're not always the stereotype that many of us have made pimps into. The bottom is what I call the best girl or guy. So under the pimp, they might have 3 or 4 people working for them underneath them. One of them might have been with them the longest and the one they trust the most. And so that person becomes the bottom. This is the one that is recruiting others in. They are making false promises to you, telling you they can get you a job or they can get you a place to live. They're the ones that really, in my son's case, I called him a hero for a long time because he's the one that would let my son call home. He was the one who was helping my son get into a rehab hospital or helping my son get, whatever it is he wanted, whether it was something new or whatever. And so this bottom person really is a spy. They're supervising, watching these, all the victims, the trafficking victims, and then going off and reporting everything back to the pimp. Anyway, and so then the other term I'd like you to be familiar with is the word stable. Stable is what describes that group. So those 3 or 4 people that are working underneath the pimp, their household, their group is called a stable. Grooming is another term that is unique to sex trafficking. To be groomed or seasoned is when a trafficker does everything they can to make the victim believe that nobody else is important in my life and that we are the most important people here. They will ostracize you from your family and your friends as quickly as 48 to 72 hours after they have brought you into their circle. They will threaten you, they will beat you, they will do everything they can in order to make you sever those ties with others in order to be exclusively with them. And be part of their circle. But again, showering you with gifts and promises of things that said, I'm okay to leave those people and I'm going to move on with you. And very hard for us to understand when you're outside of that circle, but you are so brainwashed and manipulated in the grooming process that you really truly believe everything they say. In Romeo situations, it's the I love you, I love you, I love you. Nobody else loves you as much as I love you. And there is nothing a vulnerable young teen wants to hear more than to somebody say, I love you and I trust you and I want to be with you. Federally, the national average age of a trafficking victim is between the ages of 11 to 14 years old. In the state of Wisconsin right now, we're looking at between 12 and 13 years old as the average age for our state. Now, if it's been a while since you've been 11 years old or known an 11-year-old, that's middle school. Our most vulnerable years, we're going through puberty, our body's changing, we're trying to figure out who we are. And that's all happening at that age when we are the most vulnerable group of people. Now, I will say that it's not just this age group. The youngest in the state of Wisconsin, I believe, is 18 months and the oldest is 64. So there's no box that this fits into. It's all ages, all races, all family backgrounds, religious backgrounds, all financial statuses. It's anybody and everybody. But truly what makes it unique is it's the vulnerable. The ones that are the weakest are the ones that our traffickers go after. They are looking at the runaways, those that live in our foster homes and our group homes, those that have been in residential treatment facilities, are homeless, are depressed, are drug addicts, those with low self-esteem, those that identify as LGBTQ, kids that have been through child sexual abuse, are most vulnerable kids. They prey on the internet and they watch those kids and those posts that says, man, I hate my mom, and they jump right in on that. They go on those posts when they see their posters in the background and they see posters of their high school and they know where they hang out. They are looking at what is making that child most vulnerable, and then they're seeking in there and going in there and trying to figure out how they can help them and make them feel the most loved and comfortable person. And even if they can't find a vulnerability, if you think, oh, my kid's got it all together, I don't have to worry about my child, this isn't going to happen to them, they will create one. They will find one, they will make one up, they will create one within them, so that once they get you hooked, you're going to do anything for them, even if it means putting somebody else into the game to protect yourself. Now, in order to see how easily my son was brought into trafficking, I want you to get to know who he is a little bit before. So this is my son, Jeffrey. He was a normal, regular kid. He loved to climb trees. He loved to play outside. He had lots of good friends in elementary school. But then when he went up to the middle school, his best friend had moved away. He suddenly was in a huge school with lots of new people and just really didn't know how to fit in. So he tried to do the best that he could to try all different types of things on the outside in order to try to help himself fit in. He went out for show choir. He sang and danced wonderfully, but you know, as most boys growing, their arms and legs are growing at different speeds and they're just not as coordinated as the rest. And so he was picked and teased about his dancing ability. He went out for soccer and he was very good at the sport, but unfortunately the other boys have been playing since they were much younger. And so they got a lot more field time than he did. And so he just didn't feel as good as the others. He also tried everything from the long hair to the short hair, the rock band, indie band look to, and skateboarder look to Hollister, Justin Bieber, preppy look. He was doing everything on the outside, trying to fit in. But what was really happening on the inside is that he was changing. His body was changing emotionally. He started to become very anxious and depressed. He had very low self-esteem. He had back then what we called highs and lows, where he'd have days he was just so much fun to be around, and other days he was just lethargic and sleepy and wouldn't do anything, to days where he was angry and would fly off at anything you said. So in order for him to cope with all these changes that he was feeling, he began cutting. When we asked him about what was going on and why were you cutting, he told us that he was being bullied at school about being gay, about the clothes that he wore, about his hair, about not being as talented or as smart as the other kids. So besides the self-harm, that's when we also started to notice that his grades were failing and he was starting to pull away from the few friends that he did have. And what was happening is that he found friends with those that seemed to care and would listen to him. Many of the kids had the same similar issues that he had. In many of our schools, we label those kids as the bad kids. Those are those kids that are making poor choices. I truly believe there's no such thing as a bad kid. They're just kids that are, making choices that are not the best decisions, and maybe come from a background where it's a little more difficult for them to make an appropriate decision. During this time, my son is in 6th grade. He starts experimenting with drugs. It began with marijuana. In 6th and 7th grade, by 8th grade, he was smoking cigarettes and drinking alcohol. By the summer of his 8th grade year, he started doing a drug that's called Triple C, which is your over-the-counter cold, cough, and congestion medication. By the 9th grade, he was now doing prescription pills. This is where I like to jump on my little soapbox here and just say, we know what's in the medicine cabinet in our own home, but we don't always know what's in the medicine cabinet at someone else's home. I was the type of parent that I made sure that I called the mom. I asked the mom, are you going to be home this weekend? What are you guys going to be doing? Trying to make sure that my son was going to a safe location for the weekend. But what was actually happening is my son would then leave the mom's house and go to the dad's house. And that's where my son was getting his drugs. The dad was an alcoholic and a drug addict that I was not aware of. And the boys were going over there experimenting. My son would go into a medicine cabinet. He would get a prescription pill out of there. He would try it, see how it acted with his body. If he liked it, he'd steal the whole bottle. If he didn't like it, he would leave that and go and find another one and try another one. When I go speak to the schools, I ask this question quite a bit, but do you look in a medicine cabinet when you go to someone else's house? Now, a good chunk of them don't admit it, but many of them will come up to me afterwards and say, yeah, I've done that. It is a very common thing. So get rid of your drugs. If you don't need them anymore, please put them in a lockbox. This includes your Benadryls, your cold medicines, your Robitussin, all of that. And please make sure that it's safe. My son got his first taste of drugs by going to somebody else's house. In February of his freshman year of high school, he got in trouble at school for having Triple C on campus. Now, in our school district, it's not an illegal drug, but it is against school rules to carry type of medication on school grounds without permission. And so that day, my son got in trouble. He came home from school, and as we were discussing it, he told me that he had a drug problem and he needed help and he didn't know how to stop. Now, for me, my son had been, had been using for almost 4 years now, and this was the first I'd learned of it. That evening, we took him to the emergency room, and in a matter of 4 hours, I had gone from what I thought was a normal, regular family to a family who had lost, had a child that was a drug addict. And it's certainly not something I ever thought would happen to our family. That we were able to get him up to Winnebago Mental Health and get him into a hospital for treatment. He received a dual diagnosis of being bipolar and a drug addiction. He spent 5 months in that program there, did wonderful, graduated the program, and I thought I'd bring him home fixed. I thought that you go to the doctor, you get better, you come home, and everything's okay. I had no idea how much addiction was going to stick with you for the rest of your life. Part of the process of coming home from that hospital, my son had to go into a day treatment facility. It was June, school was out, we needed someplace for him to go. So we went to this program in Black River Falls, and there he met a 14-year-old girl. The girl was living in a group home, supposed to live there till she was 18. Her mom didn't agree with what the county decided to do, and so the mom would hide the daughter out in different motels and homes throughout our community, just so that she could have access to her. What my son decided to do was start hanging out with this girl and run away with her so that she wasn't alone. Also, at this time, they were bringing drugs in on a regular basis. This program was not a drug rehab program. It was a program for juvenile delinquents, kids who didn't cope well with normal school situations. So now my son's starting to using drugs again. Drug of choice at this time was K2, the synthetic marijuana that was popular back then. So now my son is running away. It begins where it's 2 to 3 days at a time, gradually grew to be 2 weeks, 4 weeks, or 6 weeks at a time. Each time that he'd run away, he'd use heavier and heavier drugs, from meth and cocaine to LSD and heroin. And each time he'd run away, he'd use a higher level than what he was using the time before. We really started to notice an extreme amount of change in his appearance. He really had a lot of acne and oily skin. His hair became very dry. He suffered a lot of panic attacks and hallucinations. He didn't care if he shared a needle with somebody or found one on the ground and used it. He didn't care if he was going to contract some type of disease or an STI. He ended up developing a disease that's called EOE, and it's a huge long name, but basically it's the inflammation of the esophagus and stomach lining. This he developed from the triple C drug that he takes pretty regularly now. He takes it every time he can't get a hold of some other drug. That's his drug of choice that he can steal from any convenience store or Walmart. What happens with this drug is that when you take this large quantity of pills, it creates an acid in your stomach that is a foam. The foam grows through the stomach and comes up the esophagus, where the person will spit quite a bit, spitting this foamy consistency out all the time. And so what happened is, as my son was doing this, that acid was burning up the lining of his stomach and esophagus to the point where he couldn't even swallow water without any pain. So he had to be on a medication to try to help with that inflammation. My son was 5'8" and weighed 98 pounds. So he's very thin body structure on him. The other part with excessive drug use that many of you probably know is your pleasure center, that dopamine section of your brain, starts to deteriorate. And so you'll get that first high that's just amazing. And then after that, you're constantly seeking that high. What happens with excessive drug use is that that pleasure center just gets eaten away to the point where you can't even remember a happy moment in your life. You can't remember good times. This is why so many drug addicts really suffer with getting better, because they don't see any reason. I'm never going to get better. I'm never going to feel good again. And so they continue to use drugs. During all this time, my son has been in and out of rehab hospitals, in and out of group homes, foster homes, all different types of programs, whatever we could do to try to get him help. And at one point, he was in the La Crosse Juvenile Detention Center Core Academy program and did very well there. He started out in shackles and the orange jumpsuit, the whole jail situation, juvenile. And every time he went to a doctor appointment or psychiatrist appointment or anything, we had to go in shackles with a sheriff escort, with a county worker escort, and it was quite humiliating for him. And so he graduated through that program rather quickly, moved up to where he finally was on an ankle bracelet, could go out without any escorts, just him and I. He could spend time with family once in a while. He was doing really good, to the point where we were going to let him go on his own over to WTC and take classes to get his GED. So on the day he went over there to be tested, he ripped off his ankle bracelet and ran away. It's now January of 2016. He's been missing for about 6 weeks. And I suddenly get a phone call from him, and he's like, "Mom, can you come and pick me up?" Well, we'd been through so much by this point with his running away and his drug addiction that I knew it wasn't smart for us to just pick up and go down to Madison and get him. And so I set up a sting operation with the police department and asked the police to go down there and pick him up. What my son did when he was picked up that evening is told the police officer everything that he had just been involved in. He said that he was working at a dance club, a gentleman's club in Madison. He was approached by a gentleman outside of that club, and the man said, "I know you're a minor, but I can get you a job working for me, making more money than you're making here, if only you will do, help me out with my work that I do. I'll give you a place to live, some drugs, food, whatever you want, if you just come work with me." Well, Jeffrey, being homeless and living on the streets in Madison, said, "Absolutely, I'll go do it." What we found out afterwards is that these men were known child predators in the Madison area. They were trafficking boys out of their home. Their home, the job that they had was a caregiver for a young man who was physically disabled. And that was the business that they had, but they were running a trafficking operation out of that home. My son said that while he was with his men, he felt like he'd only been gone for 2 weeks, when in reality it was 6 weeks. He'd been forced to have sex with women, and if he didn't do what the men or women asked of him, then he was beaten up. He really felt like he had failed, that he really did not, this kind of was like his rock bottom moment that I thought would be. And so we were able to get him out of that situation and in the jail in Madison, sitting there waiting for him to get up to La Crosse. And if you know the system, it doesn't go quickly. We had to wait and go to jail in Madison before we could come up here to La Crosse. And so during that time frame, it took the police officers 3 days to figure out from the arrest, from the pickup until they figured out who these men were and that they were known child sex predators. During those 3 days, those men visited my son in jail. They talked to him on the phone. They were constantly in contact with Jeffrey. Once we figured out who these men were, we stopped everything. Now, personally, up until this moment, I had been very open on my social media. I wanted my son's friends to let me know where he was. They would sneak in little things, or Jeffrey would be in a picture, and I'd be able to find out where he was at and his runaways. But this time, I shut everything down. I didn't want anyone to know where Jeffrey was, what was happening. And so when we stopped all communication on social media and stopped talking to the traffickers in Madison, they assumed Jeffrey was up here in La Crosse. So now they're sending letters up to the La Crosse Juvenile Detention Center. They're making phone calls up here to the jail, trying to get information. They want to know, when is Jeffrey's court date? Where is he? Is he going to get out? Trying to find out that information from the police department. In the letters and communication to Jeffrey, what they were doing is the grooming. They were brainwashing, grooming Jeffrey to do what they wanted him to do, making Jeffrey believe that they were there to help him. They were telling him that maybe he could be emancipated, which is illegal in the state of Wisconsin, but my son didn't know that and wasn't aware of that. They were telling Jeffrey how to get into a rehab hospital, the things to say to the social workers, the things to say to the police officers, what he needed to tell them in order to get what he wanted. Jeffrey wanted more than anything to get into a hospital and get help again. And these guys were promising him that they'll get him that. Jeffrey was getting close to 18 now. They're making promises of giving him a job, a real job, after all this ended. They were also, at this time, they started stalking our family. When they couldn't get the information from the police department or the social workers, they now started going after the family. They went on social media trying to friend us at first on Facebook. Now, back then, my daughters were young adult women, and they were, it was cool to get as many friends as you could on your Facebook pages. And so there was a point where they were just accepting any friend requests. And when this happened, it was like we shut everything down. Well, now they're getting angry that we're not communicating with them. So now they're starting to come after me and sending very verbally aggressive messages to me on my phone, to asking me for information on Jeffrey. Why are you not talking to us? Why are you, we're his friends. Why are you not letting us help? Things like that. We, of course, ignored all of that. But really what was happening during all of this time, we were so focused on who those people were that we really hadn't focused on what Jeffrey had been through. We didn't understand the trauma that Jeffrey had been through in the last 6 weeks. We did not understand the brainwashing and the manipulation that they had put him through that would have caused so much trauma in his head. So Jeffrey is now transferred up to La Crosse Juvenile Detention Center. And he asked one night if he could go to a room they call the chill room. This is a room with music, a beanbag chair, and you just go in there and sit and listen to music and kind of relax. And in the past, that room has always worked really well for Jeffrey. And this time he went in there, wrapped the earphone cord around his neck, shoved his face in the beanbag chair, and attempted suicide. We're able to revive him and get him sent to Gunderson Hospital in La Crosse. That evening, he was transported 3 times from that hospital. See, the hospital didn't want him because they felt that he was good enough, he could go back to the jail. The jail felt that he was not safe, that he was definitely suicidal, he was going to hurt himself again if he was here. He needed to be in behavioral health. Behavioral health felt that he was too violent. You see, the last time that he was at Gunderson, he flipped a table with a computer on it and got in trouble and was transferred out. So they figured that same thing was going to happen to him, and they didn't want him. So by ambulance that evening, Jeffrey was transported around the city 3 times until finally the police chief, the guy in charge at Core Academy, came in and said, no, this boy belongs in behavioral health. And there Jeffrey sat. As we know, nothing happens quickly. And so Jeffrey sat in the hospital there for the next week, waiting for a decision on all of us to make on what happens next with him. Unfortunately, that took too long, and Jeffrey made the decision to climb the fence outside of the hospital. The fence is 13 feet tall. He attempted to climb 3 times over the fence, falling off of the fence. Nobody stopped him. He climbed over the fence and ran to the nearest Walgreens. When he got there, he asked a woman if he could borrow her phone and call his mom. Unfortunately, he didn't call me. He called his traffickers and asked them to come pick him up. Now, to understand why he wouldn't call me and would call the traffickers instead, I like to kind of compare it back to middle school. To him, the only kids that really cared about him were the ones that were making those poor choices. In my son's life right now, he feels the only people who really care about him were those men that were making all those promises to him. And he knew his family loved him very much. He knew that we would want what was best for him. But unfortunately, he hated to see us cry. He hated to see the pain he was putting me through all the time. And so to him, his best decision was to go right back to these people. Well, this time we knew exactly where Jeffrey had run to. We sent a police officer down there. And this time, Jeffrey is sitting on the porch of a home with another young girl. The 2 traffickers are inside the home. And when the police drive up, my son jumps off the patio and runs down into the alley. And this time when the police officer stops my son, he assaults the officer. My son's 17 years old. He's now going to go to adult jail and sit there for the next 3 months. In June of 2016, Jeffrey gets out of jail. He's able to come home and be home with us for about 9 days. And things seem to be pretty normal. He's happy to be back home, happy to be with us, but still nervous and agitated, but definitely, glad to be with us again. And then suddenly he ran away again. This time he's running down to Iowa. I have no idea at that time what the draw was in Iowa. I had no idea why he was going there, who he knew there, but that's where he was going. The social worker called me one day and told me that he was selling himself on Craigslist. And at that time, I really thought that he was dancing in clubs and selling himself to make more money for drugs. I had no idea that he was being trafficked again. And I really never learned this information until after my son passed away. What we learned is that he was being trafficked from the Madison area to Sioux City, Iowa, and that was the route that he was running during that time. During that time, I'd hear different stories from him. He'd call once in a while and tell me where he was at, what he was doing, things along that line. I'd get little hints here and there. But 2 weeks prior to his death, I got a phone call from him asking me to get him help. He wanted to come back home. And by this point, I'm doing what's called a 3-party petition. This is where I have 3 professionals saying he is in danger to himself. We need to get him into a hospital. We need to get him help. And in order to do this, I must serve him papers in Wisconsin. And so I asked him to hurry up and get home, and we'll get him the help that he needs. The next time I hear anything is on the morning of September 30th, 2016, when a sheriff knocks on my door and tells me that my son had passed away. We later found out after an autopsy and toxicology report that it was an accidental heroin and fentanyl drug overdose. My son was 17 years old. Now you'd think my story kind of would end right there, but as we're planning for the funeral, somebody drops off an envelope of photos, and on the outside of the envelope it says, "These are photos of Jeffrey from the last 4 months of his life. Please give them to the family." The funeral director looked at the photos and made the decision that these were such horrible graphic photos that I should not look at them at all. And so they gave the photos to my daughters, and my daughters looked at them and agreed that I should not look at them. It actually took me 3 months after my son's death to get the courage to look at these photos. Inside this envelope were photos of my son. Many of them are actually in this slideshow, but they're photos of my son high, using drugs, and things along that line. And then this series of photos here. This is a photo of my son being beaten by his trafficker. The man in the background is the man I kind of label as the middle guy. We have the pimp in the bottom, and he's kind of a middle guy there. All of the photos are cropped, so we can't see the head or face of the people. If you look very closely, the man has a black leather strap between his fingers, and he is beating my son. This is the last photo in a series of photos. The expression on his face and his body language is that of being slapped and beaten by that leather strap. So a lot of people ask me the question, why would I get these photos? Why in the world would the trafficker send them to me? And what I have learned is that traffickers will take photos of their victims using drugs, doing very horrible or promiscuous positions, things along that line. And then they'll threaten them and say, "I'm going to take these photos to the police, and you're going to be arrested if you don't do what I say. I'm going to mail these photos to your mom, and I'm going to show your mom what a horrible person you are." And so they take these photos to do that. I personally believe that the photos were sent to us after my son's death to show us the control that they had over him the entire time that they were with him. For some reason, they seem to think that they have a higher level of love for him than his own family did. My story doesn't end there either. We were planning my son's visitation and funeral, And on the Friday, which actually today is the anniversary of the visitation, on the Friday visitation, my social worker had come through with some friends of my son's that wanted to pay their respects, and I had given her permission to bring them through. And so on the fourth time she walked through, she was alone. And we kind of laughed and joked that she was coming in to pay her own respects this time. And she whispers in my ear as she gives me a hug and says, "He's on his way." I said, "Who's on his way?" She said, "The trafficker." Now, I'd already had a police presence at the funeral because I was very concerned that my son, friends who would come to the funeral high and cause a scene, and I just didn't want that to happen. And so I'd asked police to kind of be there, kind of patrol around, just make sure things were safe. And so the social worker informed me that, "Don't worry about it. We'll stop him at the interstate. The police are watching. He'll never make it in here." And not 5 minutes after she left, in he walked. He showed up dressed very sharply, three-piece suit, very attractive looking man, if I didn't know who he was, had a very sharp dressed woman on his arm, and woman by meaning a very young adult, crying on his arm. They walked right up to me, introduced themselves to me, and said, "I'm Jeffrey's friend from Madison." Now, I knew immediately who he was because they'd stalked me on Facebook. I'd seen his photos. I knew what he looked like. And so I immediately called the funeral director over, and we had him removed from the service. He was very respectful. He left graciously, and the police escorted him directly to the interstate, and he left town. The next morning, we had the funeral service. And the whole day was a blur. I don't remember a whole lot of the specifics of that day, but it got to the point of the service where the service is over out at the cemetery, and it's time for the family to get up and leave. And about that time, my daughter kind of elbows me and she says, "Mom, look over to your right." And over to your right is this man in this photo, standing there in his jeans, a Carhartt jacket, a baseball cap. He's got his arm around a boy about Jeffrey's age, and he's got his arm around his shoulders, and his other arm is holding the boy's arm really tight and close to him. And my gut told me at that moment that he was telling this boy that this is going to be you. If you don't do what we ask of you, you're going to be dead just like Jeffrey. And I lost it. I fell apart. I started crying. And about that time, my daughter elbows me again, and she says, "Mom, look out there." And there's a sea of about 100, 150 kids, my son's friends out there. But in amongst all those people out there is the man that I called my son's hero, the man that is a bottom. He was standing out there staring at us. And that's when I completely fell apart. And I was crying so hard you couldn't understand a word I said. But in reality, I think a lot of my family probably thought I was crying because I didn't want to put my son in the ground. But the reality of that was that I was never, ever going to leave my son with those men ever again. And that's why I do this. That's why I tell you my story, because I do not want another person to ever have to go through what our family went through and what my son went through. Now, I've learned a lot since my son's death. I've learned a lot more details about his actual trafficking situation. I have also made it my purpose to educate myself and to get to learn more about human trafficking and understand what it looks like to others. But one of my largest astonishments that I found was this law right here. There is a federal law, the Preventing Sex Trafficking and Strengthening Families Act, which was created in September of 2014. This is a law that says we must identify at-risk youth. And this does not mean kids that are in our foster system. This means any youth that we feel is at risk is also at risk to being trafficked. And this law states that we must identify them up to the age of 26 years old, not at 18, 26 years old. We are required by law to provide services to protect this individual. We must have a screening process in place so that we know who those people are, and then we must provide them services. We must report this to law enforcement immediately, within 8 hours locally and within 24 hours nationally to the Missing and Exploited Children and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. It must be their photo as well as all of their information must be reported. None of this was done for my son. He was 17 years old. A part of me believes that he would still be alive if someone would have helped me to understand what he was going through so that we could have dealt with this better. I was clueless and navigating this world blindly. And I have no blame against the lawyers, the judges, the social workers. They also didn't realize this law was out there. And even today, when I'm out speaking in communities, people are shocked that this law is out there. This does not say that you must fund those services that you provide, but you must have services available and let the families know what services are available. What we know today and what we are finding out today is that the pimps are preying on our naive. They know our youth from rural parts of Wisconsin fit that profile and are often targets for trafficking. They're everywhere. They're in our malls. They're in Walmart. They're on social media. They're everywhere looking for our kids. When those kids from our rural small towns are going to colleges in La Crosse, in Eau Claire, in Madison, in Milwaukee, when they're going off to these larger cities, they are so vulnerable because they're not prepared for life in a larger city. Now, what we're seeing is a huge increase in sex trafficking being done online. Trafficking has been around the world for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. But with the invention of the internet, it is so much easier and so much more accessible. It has brought pornography to our fingertips and available 24/7. And once someone starts looking, they're going to want to start buying. Now, I'm really excited to know that you're doing a course. I think in a couple of weeks, you're doing a webinar on social media and being aware. And I highly suggest that you pay attention to that. It's happening on social media. People are pretending they're someone they're not. It's in our online gaming and chat rooms. There are apps that kids are putting on their phones that are hiding information so that parents don't know. There are predators that are stalking TikTok and other websites that they are watching for kids looking for things. Our dating sites, our young girls and boys are going on dating sites and meeting up with men and women alone. And sexting is a big part of this. Kids are calling each other or messaging each other and saying, hey, send me a photo without your shirt on. And it's okay. Kids are doing it. And in Wisconsin, there is not a law against this. We need to stop it. We need to teach our kids to report it, that is not a good situation. I wanted to give you guys a really great list of signs to recognize a trafficking victim. There are so many. There is not one sign that says this is definitely a trafficking situation and this is not. So it's just important to understand there are so many clues and hints that are out there that can help you identify. But it's not going to be easy. The most important thing when identifying someone is to be able to create a relationship with them so that you can understand their risk and understand if they're in need of help. Human trafficking is often hidden in plain sight. You can sell a person over and over and over again. You can see a guy with 3 girls in his car and not have a clue that he's trafficking those girls. But if he was selling drugs, it's a one-time commodity. You sell it, you're done, you move on. So anyway, so I want to just go through these red flags with you. Lack of control, not being responsible for themselves, having their no eye contact with you. Obvious evidence of abuse. It could be a guy and a girl are together, you're hearing verbal threats, you're seeing the emotional abuse, the way she holds herself and carries herself. You may see her being treated in a demeaning way. You may notice poor physical health. Sometimes they work so much they don't get time to eat or drink. They're frequently being monitored. That bottom person is always with them at all times. They seem to have lost a sense of time. They don't know, like in my son's case, he was gone for 6 weeks, but felt like he was only gone for 2 weeks. Typically, they have few or very few or no personal possessions. They may carry around a little Walmart bag with them. They're not allowed to speak for themselves. Again, that bottom controls that. They share scripted stories, or confusing or inconsistent stories. A lot of times they will uh, plan a story out and it's so scripted and perfect that everyone's saying the same story. And other times it's inconsistent because their story's not the most consistent. Their mental health is usually not very good as well. So you may notice some paranoia and some signs of that. Substance abuse and addiction is huge. Across the country, this is actually a very low sign of trafficking, but in the state of Wisconsin, 92% of all trafficking cases are substance abuse or addiction related. You'll notice again poor hygiene, fatigue, malnourishment. A lot of times they're not in control of their own money or carry any ID along with them. They are often, you'll notice that they're fearful or anxious or depressed. Sometimes they're submissive, tense, nervous, paranoid. A lot of times they have a lack of knowledge of their whereabouts. If you ask them what city they're in or where are they at, they probably can't tell you because they've been driven from city to city. They exhibit fear or anxiousness when mentioning police. They are groomed and trained to hate police. So they are usually, takes a long time to develop that relationship. That's why advocacies are so important to work with police departments. You'll notice that they'll dress inappropriately for their age, maybe a lot more provocative than normal, high heels, things along that way. Sometimes you'll even see that they're just very sloppily on the opposite end of the spectrum, where they're in sweats and hoodies and just kind of hiding themselves in there. You may see them carry an extra phone. They'll have their personal phone and then they'll have their work phone. An older boyfriend or girlfriend is very common, especially in a Romeo situation. A 14-year-old girl dating a 25-year-old boy is not normally healthy. And so when you're seeing a situation like that, or even if it's an adult that's not mom or dad, and they're hanging around with this adult, we should be suspicious. Who is this person? Why are they with them? Late and absent from school a lot. I want to mention this one here because what we're seeing in a lot of our schools now is the trafficking victims are going to school every day. They're coming home, doing their homework, helping around the house, helping with their younger siblings. They're sitting down to supper with the family. And then that evening when they go to bed, they sneak out of the house and then they're going out and they're working for the night. Then the next morning they're late for school because they're so tired because they were out all night long, or they skip school. Sometimes they might be telling their parents they're going to spend the weekend at a girlfriend's house when in reality they're going to the Kalahari for the weekend and they're working some convention. So we're seeing things like that happening a lot more. Kids are going to school saying, I made $1,000 last night. You want to come work for me, and they're recruiting their friends right at school under our nose. So we need to be very aware of why our kids are not showing up at school. And then it's also something just as simple as getting something new. Someone who can't normally afford a really nice purse or some wonderful clothes, or getting their hair colored or done up, or getting their nails done, that is very suspicious. As well as more for the boys is getting electronics, new phones, iPads, things along that line that they're showing up with that they can't afford. The other real obvious sign is tattoos or branding. Traffickers will mark their victims with some type of a symbol, something on them to say you're mine. It might be a tattoo across the chest or on their arm, or sometimes it's a UPC label on the back of their neck, something like that to say you're mine, you belong to me. In my son's case, it was a case of scarring. And in the state of Wisconsin, we're seeing a lot more scarring happening than tattoos. And what that is they're taking some type of a hot object and burning the victims, or taking a knife and cutting them so that they have a scar. In my son's case, he was burnt up and down his forearms as a scarring tactic. The other thing, if you notice that maybe there's 2 or 3 girls together and they all have the exact same tattoo, that is a real simple sign as well. But there's no single indicator that is necessarily proof of human trafficking. A lot of times, the victims do not even seem distressed. Some of them may enjoy the lifestyle that they are putting in, and they will go through with the difficult things in there from their trafficker because they're enjoying all the perks and benefits of what they think is happening to them. The biggest thing when I go out and speak and share is that knowing who to report it to and how to report it when you see something. If you work in an area or an organization and have your own protocols, you certainly know what those are. But if you see something, if your gut tells you something's just not right, you need to say something. You need to find a trustworthy person to tell. You need to call your police department. The state of Wisconsin has partnered with Great Rivers 211, and so you can now call 211 for a tip. They also have a texting line, 898-211, which is wonderful if because we know a lot of our kids today don't actually speak in a phone, they text. I also have the Polaris information on here as well for the national hotline. But certainly if it is happening now and something you think is suspicious right now, you need to call 911. At the end of 2019, every single human trafficking case in the news in Wisconsin was a school district employee, a school administrator, a principal, or a coach, the most trusted people that we leave our children with. So it's important that we know what trafficking looks like. We need to talk with our children and our grandchildren about how to use the internet and how to use their phones. It's a completely new stranger danger that's out there. Now, like I said, I have been educating myself and learning more every time I can about human trafficking. And part of that process was being asked to be on the Wisconsin Anti-Human Trafficking Advisory Council. And what this group decided to do was determine that Wisconsin had a huge problem with sex trafficking. We know that we're number 3 in the country for human trafficking, and yes, it's mostly out of Milwaukee, and so a lot of the rest of the state, especially the western side of the state, think, I don't need to worry about this. But what we're finding is that they're recruiting our kids on the rural sides and bringing them to those cities like Milwaukee. So we all need to know what this looks like. So what they did is they determined that, yes, we definitely have a problem. They created a wonderful community guide that's on their website for a resource to help communities look at what trafficking looks like in their community. They also created an indicator and response guide. If you do not know what that is, I highly suggest that you go on their website and look that up. This is a wonderful resource that says if your gut has a check mark in 3 boxes, then you know that that person most likely is being trafficked. It kind of helps you digest all your thoughts in your head and figure out, is this person really being trafficked or not? And so I will guide you to that if you need help finding that afterwards. We also created the campaign, Wisconsin, We Need to Talk, which is a wonderful campaign, poster campaign. It's in every rest area in the state of Wisconsin. We did billboards. We also created a website called wisconsintalks.org, which is a wonderful website of resources available to just the regular person, not the people that are into all this legislation and everything. It's just the easy, quick information on trafficking. Wonderful resources and tools available to you there. Then we also created a film called It Happens Here, The Reality of Sex Trafficking in Wisconsin. I'm really excited that our family is one of the 4 families that was chosen to be in this story. This film was created with the intention to go into our schools throughout the state, through middle school and high school in the health curriculum. We've met with DPI creating this curriculum, and it is all ready to go, and then COVID hit. So teachers have not been trained on this yet. We're hoping by December of this year of 2020, we will be able to get this, get the guidance counselors as well as train the trainers in each school district to be able to train on this film and the curriculum that goes with it. And so I'm excited that that's finally going to happen this spring. This film is also available for the general public to view at the website that's listed on this slide here. So you can go there under the Anti-Human Trafficking Toolkit, and you will find this film, and you can show it at any of your organization gatherings or events as well. I also work with the Janesville Police Department and the Rock County Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force. We created a program called SLOTH, Supporting Loved Ones Through Hardship. Basically, this is a support group for family members, loved ones of a trafficking victim, to be able to walk with them through this journey. Healing is not easy. Healing is not fast. And as we know, sloth moves extremely slow. So it was the perfect animal to choose for our group. And my son Jeffrey absolutely loves sloths, so perfect for us. But we were able to create this program that just walks right alongside families and helps them understand what their child has been through. I also work with Convergence Resource Center in Milwaukee, and we created another program called Through the Eyes of a Parent, Walking with Loved Ones Through the Unthinkable. This is a much more detailed program than SLOTH. This is an actual 12-week program that we've created. We walk one-on-one with families. What we're finding is that families don't want to do a group setting. They don't want to, they suffer a lot of shame and guilt and hurt that this has happened to their families, and so they don't want to publicly acknowledge it, even with people who have been through the same thing as them. And so we walk one-on-one with families through their life together, helping them understand what trafficking looks like, help them understand what their child has been through. Many times, a trafficking victim will leave their home as a teenager because something happened. Something happened in the home that this child decided to run away, that they decided that they weren't going to live at home anymore, and they took off and left. And unfortunately, they got involved in sex trafficking. Now, it may be many years later, you know, and they're in their 20s or 30s, and the families, you know, they're not trafficking anymore, and they're coming back home, and the family wants that child back that was the child that left so many years ago, and they're a different person. They both are different people. And so what we are trying to do is help families come back together again, help families mend that hole that was created all those years ago, and be able to help them walk through this together, understand what it was like for the child to be trafficked, and help them understand so that they can be a family and be one together again. I never thought that this would be something that I would know anything about. I never thought I would know anything about drugs that I do now, or being a runaway, being sex trafficked, navigating the juvenile court system or the hospitals. But I realized in this process how naive I really was, how little I knew, and how easy it is to look the other way and not want to believe that my child was really doing this. But it did happen, and it does happen. I truly believe that each and every one of us together, that we can all make a difference, one person at a time, giving hope to those who struggle in their lives, to know that there are caring people out there who want to help. So I thank you for having me here today. I thank you for listening and taking time out of your busy schedule to be here. I hope I shared a little bit with you about what trafficking looks like, some signs, and hopefully able to make a difference in your life. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for sharing that story, that powerful story about you and your family and your son, and the resources to what we can do to prevent this from occurring in other families' lives. Just thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This is the time that we have questions. Are there questions that anybody has of Lisa at this time? Any comments you want to make, you can put them in the Q&A. I'm just going to wait a minute or two and see if there's any comments or questions. This is a lot to take in, Lisa, as I'm sure you're aware. Comment here, Lisa, thank you for having the strength to share your stories. Very powerful and informative. And then not a question, but thank you so much for being so open and honest with sharing with us. It was super eye-opening.
You're welcome. You know, I think all of us like to think that this doesn't happen here, you know, and this doesn't happen in lacrosse,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
and that's how scary this is.
There's a question here, Lisa. What is some advice to give to parents that want to ask their child if they think that they're being trafficked?
Yeah, good question. So we don't like to use the word traffic because kids don't understand that. Until you are educated and understand what trafficking is, you're not going to recognize. I will say in the last few years, we've been doing a lot more education. There's, you know, the Blue campaign and a lot of great things that are happening out there. And so that we are seeing an influx of calls coming in where people saying, I think I'm being trafficked. And it's because of the education. But really the most important thing to ask is, are you safe? Are you being forced to do something that you don't want to do? Those type of questions, because you're not putting it in their head that because they're going to, if you say I'm being trafficked, I'm like, no, I'm not being trafficked. So you want to put the words in there a little bit more like, you know, more open-ended to say, you know, do you feel safe with this person you're with? You know, they're probably going to say they love them, you know, because that's always a big part of it. But that's an important part of that question to ask that.
Good advice. Another question, Lisa. Does law enforcement and other agencies provide thorough training to their staff now about human trafficking?
So the key word in that sentence is thorough. I do believe that they get training. When you go, the Department of Justice has changed the Wisconsin State Patrol training, and they do get a large section on human trafficking when they go through that program. I don't know about police or sheriff training, you know, like that training academies, if they get it. I know that here if they go through the program at WTC in Sparta, they do get human trafficking as part of their training. But thorough is probably not an accurate thing. Most often it's going to be a 2-hour seminar at a pre-conference somewhere they're going to get. A lot of organizations will do the same thing. It'll be a pre-conference day or a couple hours of training here and there. Before I, you know, started speaking and sharing, I didn't know anything about this stuff, you know. So now that I search for it and I hunt for it, there is a lot of wonderful resources, and I think there's one good thing that's come out of COVID, for me at least, is so many people are doing things on Zoom. They're doing things in webinars just like this, and conventions and places that I never would have been able to afford to go to or been able to get the time away from work to go to. I now can sit and listen to almost on a weekly basis. I'm probably listening to some webinar, some podcast, something on human trafficking to educate myself. And I think we have to take advantage of that, take advantage of all the free training that's out there to get ourselves educated, because unfortunately it may not come from funding within our organization. A police officer that I work with in the Janesville Police Department, he's an investigator for human trafficking down there. And he said the number one thing that he struggles with within the department is getting the higher ups, the admin up higher, to understand that this is not a quick, fast sell. It takes a long time to develop a relationship with a trafficking victim. And then it's not the police officer's job to be that advocate for that victim. It's his job to get them out and get the information out so we can get a prosecution. We need the advocates and the other people to come in and walk alongside the police department so that we can support these victims as they come out of trafficking. And then there's probably a very good chance that maybe 7 to 13 times they're going to go back into trafficking again before we can finally get them out for sure. So there's a lot more we need to do in this area.
Lisa, there's a comment. Thank you, Lisa, for sharing your story to bring awareness to this topic and to helping others. And there's a question. Was the end result for the traffickers, were they ever apprehended?
So in our story, no, they were not apprehended. It is my son's word against their word in the first case when we brought them out. The second time when he was on the home, sitting at the home of the traffickers, there was no proof that the men inside the home knew that my son was outside of the home, and so there was no arrest made there. At the funeral, they were just people coming to the funeral. So unfortunately, I have no proof of anything. I believe in my information I have learned after my son's death. I believe that the traffickers were actually stalking my son for some time before they approached him. The traffickers lived in the same trailer park as a girl that my son was hanging out with. I believe that the traffickers bought the hotel room with, we know that the hotel room is paid by cash. I'm quite positive the traffickers paid for that hotel room. The traffickers were the people who picked my son up in Iowa and brought him back to Wisconsin. I'm quite positive the traffickers paid for the drugs that killed my son. There was a girl with my son the night he died, and she's not talking because she's being trafficked as well. So unfortunately, no, I have no arrest. Police often say that they will gather their evidence against a trafficking, in a trafficking case or any case, and then once the guys think that they're on their tail and they're getting close to them, then they're going to take off and run to another city. So to our knowledge, they are off in another city. They're in Stevens Point, Wausau area. I've also heard that one was over in Oregon, Wisconsin, down by Madison. So they're still out there. They just moved to another town, another city.
Lisa, 2 more questions. One is, do the pimps, bottom, and all involved get prison time if caught? I'm sure it's very hard to catch these people.
Yeah, absolutely. In any case, you've got to have a lot of evidence, and it's got to be so concrete that that the lawyers can make a case and get them time. Wisconsin is doing better at legislation, so that we are able to treat a victim as not as I forgot the right words, but not have them be in the case as a prostitute or something like that, that they're actually being treated as a victim so that we can get them the support and help that they need. The time served that pimps or bottoms or anyone involved in a case is becoming longer. And I don't know off the top of my head exactly how many years it is for a first time offense. But like most cases, the first time they get caught, it's almost always a slap on the hand, a very minor charge. It's hardly ever do you see the cases where they're getting a long prison term at all, unfortunately.
Lisa, another question for you. What is the proper term to use, human trafficking or sex trafficking? They've used both terms.
Yeah, both terms are okay. Human trafficking envelops everything, all forms of trafficking. So if you were speaking in general, human trafficking would be the term to use. That would include labor trafficking, organ harvesting, sex trafficking, all that. Sex trafficking is specific to sex trafficking. When you speak about it, these are anti-human trafficking efforts. They are not human trafficking efforts. We are anti-human trafficking. We are trying to stop human trafficking. So that's why you'll see the word anti put into a lot of human trafficking work that we do.
A comment, I'm so sorry for your loss and all that your son and family have endured. And then a question. I've heard of some hotels, motels provide training to their staff to look for signs of trafficking. Do you know if there are a lot of hotels or chains that offer this training to their staff?
So some of our larger hotel chains, name brand hotel chains, are doing their own training on there. The Wisconsin Hotel and Lodging Association has created a free webinar for every hotel employee, hotel, motel in our state. You do not have to be a member of their organization. That information is in the toolkit on the Department of Children and Families website. It is a great great webinar. It's very short, but it's a really good training tool for hotel employees to recognize the signs. I would love to see, as Convention and Visitors Bureaus and Chamber of Commerce's, to highly encourage this type of training in their communities, especially like, we are right along interstate, over here in Toma. And so, it's really important that we are paying very close attention. I know a lot of people that frequent truck stops just to check and make sure that girls are safe over there and that nothing is happening. So there's definitely an important organization called Truckers Against Trafficking that do some fabulous work. They train almost all of the trucking companies now are training their truckers to recognize what human trafficking looks like, because it is happening in a lot of our truck stops across the country. So yeah, there's some great resources out there. We are also starting on the other side of the hotels thing is, I have a degree in hotel and restaurant management, so I know hotels really well. And what we are seeing now is lawsuits against hotels for not recognizing human trafficking happening. So just by owning a hotel and being a hotel employee, if you do not see something suspicious and report it, there are federal law cases happening right now against huge hotels, Wyndham hotels, Marriott hotels. A lot of these larger hotel chains are getting lawsuits right now because they are not educating their staff on what trafficking looks like to stop it. So, I mean, that's a big game changer in the world right now, to recognize that if we don't educate ourselves, we could be sued. And that's something that I think we all need to be paying very close attention to right now.
Lisa, do you think, when I think about the beginning of your story and how your son struggled with fitting in and wanting to belong, are there things do you have recommendations for things that we can do, in that transition from 5th to 6th grade, those middle school years, things that we can do as families or staff working with young people?
Yeah, in my work, I work at the middle school here in Toma too, and I think that's such a critical age. And when we went to DPI, and we're talking about how are we going to get this film in and who's going to see it, and I said it's got to be shown to 5th grade. I mean, I've been pushing 5th grade all along, and everyone thinks, we want to keep our babies naive as long as possible, and the second we show them something scary, they're going to go do it. And that's not how it is. We just need to protect them. There's a way that we can tell them this and talk to them about this. I have a friend of mine who we were at an event speaking, and somebody asked, how do you talk to your toddlers even about it? How do you talk to the younger kids about it? And it's those conversations of, this is my body and nobody else can touch it. This is this is private areas. You have that conversation with them and just say that this is your body and you need to protect it. And if anyone touches it or hurts you in any way, you need to come and talk to me. Always know that I'm somebody you can trust, or know somebody you can trust. And those are very important things to be able to share. When our kids get up into middle school, and they, I think, it's just such a crazy time for them. And I think there's a lot, when I look back, there's a lot of it was that normal teenager, or was that because my son was on drugs, or was that because he was being bullied, or was that because he was bipolar and undiagnosed? A lot of that is just such an emotional roller coaster. And we as parents have to walk that with them and recognize and understand. Cutting is a huge issue in our middle schools right now. kids want to inflict pain on themselves so they don't have to think about the pain. And when I go and talk to schools, I can't tell you how many kids talk to me about cutting, and that they're a cutter. They'll show me their scars. I think that's huge, that we are just very, very aware of how difficult it is to be a teenager or a young tween today, and to be able to walk that walk with them, and guide them through that, and listen. I have a lot of teachers ask me, especially a lot of my son's teachers, have a lot of regret that they didn't do enough. I wished I would have done more. Why didn't I try harder? And my advice I always tell them is, don't give up. Those kids that are, my daughter teaches EBD, and I actually just told her this last night. She has a girl who she has asked her hundreds of times, why do you love me? Why do you care about me? And that's my goal. Like, I want to love on those really hard ones as much as I can, and love on them so much that they ask me, why do you love me? And that's what it's about. Don't ever give up. Don't ever, ever give up on somebody. I tell a lot of the kids, if you notice a friend, maybe they were your really good friend in elementary school, and now you get to middle school and you're trying different sports and different activities, so you find a different friend group. But if you notice someone's going down that path of the wrong friend group, a lot of times what happens is we say, sayonara, I don't want to be your friend anymore. And what needs to happen is for us to be able to pull that friend back and say, I need you to be in my friend group, and invite them to your house, invite them over. Don't isolate them, bring them back into your friend circle, because that's the only way you're going to be able to pull them back. Because once they get into that other friend group, we've lost them. By high school, it's really hard to even get them back out of that group again.
Just one last question, Lisa. What can be done if you think or suspect somebody is being trafficked?
So I highly suggest you get a hold of the indicator guide. I wanted to put it in my slides, and I can't figure out how to do that, unfortunately, but there's a wonderful indicator guide. It's on the DCF website that you can go and use. It will give you the signs. So if your gut tells you something's wrong, call somebody and report it. If you call 211, they'll call the local police department in your area and report it to your police department. If you call Polaris, they will call your local police department and report it. So no matter what, don't ever feel like you should not report something. Now, I will tell you, get as much information as you can. Don't just call and say, I was at Walmart and this man was following me around and he was driving a blue sedan. You need more information. We're hearing a lot of this stuff happening right now. Then when the police investigate it and look into it, it's just some miscommunication. It's not real. But I'm also here to tell you that there are a lot of creepy, scary people out there. And I don't think we should just look the other way. And I know my opinion's probably very different from a lot of other advocates out there, but, we just had a situation with the Amish out here and it was suspicious, so we need to just be very aware of our surroundings. And if anything in your gut tells you it's just not right, then report it and find someone to report it to. And if you need to talk it over with somebody, talk it over, but know that you should report it no matter what. Police have to look into it.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for taking your time today to answer all of our questions. I just thank you.
You're welcome.
And thank you everyone else for being part of our third Informed Families webinar series. Please note there are 2 more webinars in this series that will be upcoming next week and the following week. Please share. You can register at lacrossecountypreventionnetwork.org. Thank you. And do we stop?
You can end it and it will stop recording. Or do you want me to stop it?